Sup nerds! So 2 handheld videos ago, I did say that the RS97 was the very last emulation handheld that I had to show. And that was true per se. The video that came after it was the Miyuu A30, which, as I have mentioned there, it wasn't mine and I did have to give it back. And that was it. So what are we doing here today? Well, I do have another handheld to show, but it's not an emulation handheld per se. Can it emulate? Yes, it can, but that wasn't the main purpose of this handheld. So I don't categorize it as a emulation handheld, but as you all know, I do like a handheld with a bit of history to it. So today we are going to be talking about this little fella here. And this, my friends, is the GPD Win 1. And this, my friends, is the very first GPD Win. So first things first, a lot of you may confuse this with the GPD Win Mini, but it is not. This is the GPD Win, also known as the GPD Win 1, which was the very first handheld PC from GPD, all the way back in 2016. And as it turns out, it is also the very first mass-produced handheld PC with a focus on video games. Of course, there were other handheld PCs before this. Just off the top of my head, even back in 2003, there was a Sony handheld PC, but those did not have joysticks nor gamepad buttons. Those were, for all intents and purposes, more like tablet PCs. Of course, nowadays we do have tablets that can do PC stuff, but because the touchscreen tech back then wasn't that great, we did have tablet PCs with the keyboard on it and a bunch of buttons and whatnot, and that, for all intents and purposes, and by definition, were handheld PCs. But in terms of handheld PC that were made with gaming in mind, the GPD Win 1 was the very first mass-produced one, way before the Steam Deck. Of course, the Steam Deck was what popularized handheld PCs for gaming, but just as a side information, the GPD Win 3 came out months before the Steam Deck did. And this, as I said, is the GPD Win 1, which came out several years before the GPD Win 3. So yes, it is a little guy with a lot of history, but because this was the very first one and from 8 years ago, this little guy isn't that strong. In fact, it is pretty weak, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Let's take a look at the outsides first, like we usually do. I do have the one with the metal top, which is fantastic. It does have a sort of matte finish, but it does get a lot of smudges, which is not that great, but you know, still pretty cool that it has a metal top. The bottom here is sadly plastic, and as you can see, there is some holes for ventilation here, 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 and here. And over here you can see there is a little switch with 3 modes here, and this is the internal fan. If you put it to the left, the fan is off. If you put it in the middle like it is right now, the fan is on but not that strong, and then at the right is the fan at the maximum for when you play heavier games. Now it is interesting that they made it manual like this. Handheld PCs nowadays are all automatic, but you know, pretty cool to see this here. The form factor here is not just a clamshell, but you can definitely tell that it took inspiration on the 3DS. In fact, I think the dimensions are pretty close to the N3DS XL, but in the backside here you can see that there is a lot of things that we don't see on the 3DS. Now we do have L and R here, and the L2 and R2 here, which is fantastic for gaming, of course, but if you look closely, it is like a hinge on there, so the button is very frail somewhat. You can see that it doesn't really doesn't make me too confident that it will survive like an impact, because it is on there just by a single hinge, I think. So yeah, it will rattle, it will, even when you click it, it will like move like side up, down before you can actually click it. It's not a great feeling button to press. The L1R1 does feel slightly more stable compared to the L2 and the R2, but it's still, if you see, it does shake around a bit with that click. But you know, as we say in this channel, it is what it is. We do also have a headphone jack here, a USB 3 port, which is fantastic. Not a lot of handhelds have this, nor back then nor today, but having a full-size USB definitely comes in handy. It does have a micro SD slot as well, so you have options in transferring files. This is a mini HDMI, I believe, for you to connect to other monitors and screens. And of course, we also do get the USB-C port, which for 2016 was fairly new, but still pretty cool to see here. This is what it charges through. That's it for the outside. Now opening this, we do have a keyboard here, which is fantastic. Of course, it is small. They are curved keys. I think the best way to describe it is like a BlackBerry keyboard. Now it is fairly complete. You can see the numbers, and there's even the FN key for the F1, F2 and all that. You can also see on the side here, this is part of the gamepad. First of all, there is select and start over here because we don't have any of the side buttons there. There is a print screen and a scroll lock. Press the function key, it does become insert and pause. The L3, R3 are here because these sticks don't click. They do feel more like the PS Vita analogs, and maybe they are, and that's why they don't click. And then there is the volume buttons here. This is the power button, and this is the Xbox button. Now I'm not too sure what it does, but yeah. And then as I mentioned, there are the two analogs here, which do feel okay. They're inset so that it won't touch the screen when it closes. That said, it is not inset too much that you would be able to put a thumb cap on it for better grip. So it does slip around a little bit when you're playing. And because it is from 2016, the rubber has been worn down a little, so it's even more slippery than I assume what it would have been brand new. There is the X, Y, A, B buttons like in an Xbox layout, but you can see that it also has on the side the PlayStation button layout as well, so that if you do need to look at it, you don't get confused. There is a D-pad here also, and it does feel sort of like a Wiimote D-pad maybe. Doesn't really feel like N3DS XL D-pad, so I think it might be a Wiimote D-pad, which is not too bad, I guess. And then you can see that there is another switch there with 3 modes. The middle part is of course for the mouse and keyboard. The side is the Xbox controller, so if you leave it on the right, the Windows will recognize this gamepad as an Xbox gamepad. And then if you put it to D, then you will have to map it yourself. I just stay mostly on the keyboard and mouse and the Xbox controller. So yeah, that is it for the outside. There is the screen, which is quite nice. I do like it quite a bit. The hinges are okay. Just being a collector, I don't really like opening and closing it too much, nor too strong. And it is pretty heavy. I will leave the specs of this handheld right here as per usual, but this is pretty heavy, and when you play heavier games, it does heat up quite a bit, even with the fan to the maximum. But like I said, this is the very first GPD Win, so there was a lot of stuff that they were still getting a hang of. Even the GPD Win 2, which came out like a year and a half after this one, I believe, even though it was much stronger, it did have heating issues as well. So it is just something that you have to live with if you are going to play on this little device. Still, for a first iteration, I think they did a really good job with the form factor, really bang up job. It doesn't feel uncomfortable at all. I do have pretty standard sized hands, and holding this, the thumbs do rest on top of the sticks, which is very comfortable to hold. Even back here, the tip of my index finger does rest on the L2 and the R2, which is fantastic. And this side of the joint of the finger does rest on top of the L1 and R1. Very comfortable to hold this despite it just being flat in the back. It is large enough that it does feel pretty good. Typing on the keyboard with your thumbs might not be too comfortable. I do find myself often holding it with one hand and then typing it like this, but maybe that will depend on the person. Now the GPU and the chipset for this is for a computer is pretty weak, and it does only have 4 gigabytes of RAM, so it can't run that much. Even though I did say that this is the first handheld PC with a focus on gaming, for the specs, even back then, it couldn't really be considered a gaming PC. But still, back then it was incredible how much they were able to cram in this form factor, because really the computer components only started to be developed to be smaller once the companies did see that handheld PCs were something people were interested in. Back in 2016, there wasn't really a noticeable demand for this kind of devices, which is why GPD Win couldn't make it that strong. But like I said, they do keep getting better. GPD Win 2 was almost twice as strong as this, and then GPD Win 3 was much better than both. And like I said, this can emulate stuff. If we look at that one emulation handheld spreadsheet to see what it can emulate, It can emulate pretty good up to and including Dreamcast, and then it can do some PSP and very few GameCube stuff. That said, because this was the first handheld PC, the focus on this was not emulation. This does run Windows 10, so you could install Steam, Epic Games, all that stuff. So that became the main focus for a lot of people who were using this. Of course, a lot of people did turn to emulation in the end anyway, because like I said, this device isn't that strong, so it couldn't do AAA gaming of 2016 games. From the little bit that I tested, games from like 2010 and below could run okay on this. So let's turn this on and show. You can see the LED light turned here. And it does take a little while to boot up, but nothing too bad. Now as you see, I did put Steam and Epic Games on it, and over here, something that I wanted to show before was that on the keyboard mode, the right stick moved the mouse, and then right click is the right bumper here, left click is the left bumper here, and then you scroll with the left stick. It's surprisingly intuitive, it's pretty nice. And like I said, because it runs Windows, you can go on the internet, check your email. It does have Wi-Fi, so you can work from this if you really wanted to. I did see some videos of people even editing videos in this, which is pretty crazy to think about. Of course, they do mention that they couldn't render on it. They could just edit and then transfer the files to their computer to render there. I've also seen artists connect Wacom tablets to this to draw on this and whatnot, and people just had a lot of fun back when it came out, because it was pretty crazy to see a computer this small, a mini laptop. Now we were talking about emulation, but I will admit I didn't want to emulate anything that we have done with our other handhelds, just because I think that is pretty redundant. I wanted to emulate GameCube to see how well it would do, but if you see here, when I try to open it, it blinks and then it closes by itself. I can't get it to open, and I'm wondering if maybe it's because this is the latest version of Dolphin and this device is again from 8 years ago. Maybe there's something that clashes and doesn't really work, but I can't seem to be able to open Dolphin here. So I can't even test out the GameCube games that I downloaded for this, but you know, it is what it is. Just going back a little bit on its history, back in 2016 when this came out, this was the king of emulation. Like I said, the main focus wasn't emulation, it was the handheld that could emulate the most up to that point. Nothing came close to it, and it only got dethroned by the Moki, which came out in 2019. So after it came out for 3 years, it remained the top dog of emulation handheld, which is pretty crazy to think about, especially because nowadays a lot of Android handhelds can do so much more than this little guy can do in terms of emulation. And now in 2025, handhelds like the Retroid Pocket 5 and A-Node Pro and A-Node Max, they can run Windows emulator and play games that even this guy can't play. So you know, Android handhelds have come a really long way, handheld PCs even more so. But yeah, it's just crazy how fast we progressed up to that point. Like I said, from 2016 to 2019, this one was the best handheld that money could get. And then 2019 it was dethroned, but from 2019 to now, which is just 6 years, things have progressed monumentally. Like you can't even compare this handheld PC to the handheld PCs nowadays, which is pretty crazy. We can try out some of the games that I downloaded here, just to show you what to expect. I did say that this is a pretty weak device, but most indie stuff it will run completely fine. You can see I did download a lot of games that I had from GOG that I got for free from Prime, and they all work fairly well. Some do heat up the device a little more than the others. These indie and older titles do handle pretty well here, and you can see I do have Far Cry 3 and Resident Evil 5 here, and I think these are sort of the limit of this device. Turn on the game and then you switch it to gamepad mode. We'll turn on the fan to maximum.
Destination coordinates.
Squares up ahead. Over there, Lofi is waiting for the deal.
Now the running is awkward because I do need the L3 to run, so I need to hold this too to run. It's kind of weird.
We should keep moving. They'll find us soon. We need to get out of here. We need to get to that house. We'll have a better chance of finding them.
Command Kirk. The locals were hostile and we had to use force. And we don't have any contingency plans for this situation.
Roger on the locals, but your orders still stand.
What does that mean? Was HQ expecting this?
Yeah, so it's definitely playable. It does run very well. There was no lag. Just that it heats up quite a bit even with the fan on, like I mentioned. I did have the fan at the maximum and it does heat up quite a bit. Not too crazy, but if you play for a longer time, it does keep getting hotter, and then I assume it will start lagging up after a while. But you know, it does work really well, and I think this is the cutoff point. I did see some people playing Sleeping Dogs on this device, but on that one it does lag up quite a bit, especially when it heats up more. But yeah, as far as heavier games go, like I said, Resident Evil 5, games around there like 2009, 2010, that is probably the cutoff. People have played Batman Arkham Asylum and Arkham City on this too, seemingly satisfactorily apparently as well. But from the games I tested, I think Resident Evil 5 is the most I would go to. But like indie games, of course, they do all work really well, and because it is a handheld, it does feel really good to play indie games on there. And another game that I do enjoy is Need for Speed Underground. Now I do have to put the music down. The music is the best part of Need for Speed games, but I do have to put it down because of DMCA. Yeah, so to get the controller to work on older games like this, you do have to mess around quite a bit, because once you put on keyboard, it won't recognize the joypad anymore. And once you put on the joypad, it won't recognize the mouse anymore. So it does get a little iffy, but you know, you can figure it out, just like I did. And of course, Underground 1 is a much older game than Resident Evil 5. Oops. But yeah, Underground 1 was definitely one of my favorite games back in the days. I do remember I bought the CD twice. We had Underground 1 at home, and then I did travel to stay somewhere for a month. So I did end up buying it again so that I could keep playing during my vacation. Of course, like I said before, this is a much older game than Resident Evil 5, but because it is much older, it doesn't heat up too much if you play it. And even if it does, over time, because it's a racing game, you can, take a break between races. So I think it's games like this that makes me more comfortable on this handheld rather than an FPS. That there isn't a lot of rest time during the gameplay, which is why I do have Far Cry 3 installed on here, but I don't really feel too comfortable playing it on this. But yeah, it is a super cool handheld. I do love it despite it being much weaker than other handheld PCs nowadays. And even compared to a lot of the Android handhelds nowadays, this is much weaker than those. But still, I do love this quite a bit. Not only because it does have a really cool form factor and its place in the history of handheld gaming, but also because it can run Steam and Epic. It just makes this handheld a lot more convenient. You can just have all your games on the go, play the heavier games on your desktop, and then play the indie games on this, It's just really cool to have, really nice. I do like it quite a bit, especially with Epic Games. Since we get a free game every Thursday, it is pretty cool to have a little handheld to try the games on if they're not too heavy, just to see if it'll run and all that. Speaking of which, I was thinking we could make a series for those free Epic games that we get every Thursday, trying it on this handheld and on my ROG Ally to see how well will run in these handhelds, and maybe make a small first impressions video on the game that we get. I think that could be pretty cool. Let me know if that is something you guys would be interested in. And yeah, I think that's it. Not much really to talk about. Like I said, on the chart here, it does show you what you can emulate on it. I don't have a lot of space on this. The internal storage is 64 gigabytes, and then the micro SD I have on it is also 64, so I don't have too much space. And yeah, super nifty to have. But would I recommend this for people in 2025? Probably not. Not only because it is slightly harder to find them nowadays, especially in a good working condition. It has become more of a collector's item, so it will be slightly pricier despite its performance. And like I said, nowadays you can find even Android devices that will perform better than this. So if you are getting a handheld to actually play games on it, more than just for collecting the handheld itself, you're probably better off buying a more modern handheld PC, a Steam Deck perhaps, or even one of those newer Android devices like the Retroid Pocket 5. I did see people running Winlator on it and playing Hitman Absolution and Far Cry 3 and all that pretty well on it. So for the purpose of gaming, I think those will provide you a better experience with better performance. That said, again, I can't tell you enough, I do love this little guy. I do boot it up to play around with it a little from time to time. Let me know if there's something specific you would like me to try on this. This one is mine, so I will have it with me so I can make future videos with it, unlike the Mi UA30. So yeah, let me know, and expect to see this guy more in the future when we try the free Epic games. And yeah, a bit of a shorter video this time, but that is all I had to say and all I had to show for now. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider helping out the channel by clicking on the join down below. Subscribe to see more videos like this and of other collection videos that I make in the channel. And of course, always nerd on.